Hey friends, this is Joseph Maynor. So what I want to do in this video is actually want to go through kind of an enlightenment contemplation, spiritual enlightenment. And in my last video, I talk about truth from the context of love, where I don't really make a huge distinction between spiritual enlightenment and other forms of religion or spirituality. I think that's really fundamental to love, because love is all about extending the relation. And not everybody is going to have integrated truth with a capital T, love with a capital L, beauty with a capital B, blah, blah, blah. Right? And then not even. So it's about being an ambassador to this work, not necessarily being some kind of a professor or snob. I mean, love is about inclusion, but we all get into a teacher mode, and this was a conversation that I had with somebody on actuality of being, and I really thought this was a well-formed contemplation between us. It was a dialogue. Sort of. Yeah, it actually was a dialogue. It was posted on there. So you're reading what I'm posting. I might riff off it a little bit. But this guy, he gave me an account. He gave me like a pretty significant account of spiritual enlightenment and language. And so I offered my own perspective on it. And what I want to do is I want to share this with you guys. This is not just serious, it's also funny too. And I'm going to try to, as I riff off of each one of these pieces of it, right, I want you to see kind of how, like, you have truth, love, beauty, and wisdom, and how they're all interrelating, and how I'm sort of like improvising off of this. So I don't think he wants to be named, and so I'm going to respect his privacy. But I thought this was a really beautiful discussion, and it actually gave me a lot of respect for him. And so, anybody who communicates with you like genuinely, you develop a respect for, because they're aiding in your growth. They're not just like protecting their own ego. They're actually trying to like give you something to chew on. And it's just like, okay, well, I'll chew back. It's like the mirror, right? You give me something to chew on, I'll chew back, and I'll feed it to you back. We're feeding it to each other, actually. But it's not this kind of like neurotic push and pull of teachers that are incalcitrant, right? That's a word for you guys. Calcify. Notice that, incalcitrant, calcify, meaning like you're not going to budge. This is your name, rank, and serial number, and you're sticking to it, right? There are people like that, and you know what? Leave these people alone. Let them be, But ultimately, karma is not going to dictate who you communicate with. So you may be used and abused by trying to help people that you didn't even realize that that's what you were doing, because you think of yourself as just being an individual looking after yourself. Well, if that was the case, you would just be focused on yourself, but you're not, right? So it's a little bit more complicated. This issue of who am I, what is the self, is a little bit more complicated than most people realize. And even in Indian philosophy, even though it's kind of like made into a philosophy, even Christians understand this. Right? Like, they view it as love, actually. Ministry, even. Giving back. So it's kind of like different ways of signaling the same kind of thing. Signaling truth, signaling love, signaling beauty, signaling wisdom. But what I want to do, just with that preface aside, is get into this contemplation here between me and this person. So, I'm going to use his language. Quote, "Hi, enlightenment is not that you get to know something. It's the realization that you know absolutely nothing. Completely. And to be okay with that and not finding it troublesome." Now, this is what a person told me in writing. A person, an individual. Somebody typed this. I'm assuming like ChatGPT did not type this, right? I've known this guy for years, so I'm telling you, I'm pretty confident this is a person who typed this. It's the realization that you know absolutely nothing completely, and to be okay with that and not finding it troublesome. So my response was, I feel like we do know a small amount of absolute truth. Like we can know non-duality and that consciousness is not the mind. Now this is going to notice that we're in a dialogue, we're in a written dialogue together. He said something, I said something. Action, reaction, action, reaction. So it is the way it is, right? In terms of the format of the conversation. You wouldn't, maybe you would talk like this to somebody face to face. I don't know. I mean, I've never talked to anybody like this face to face, to be honest with you. So already we're in a little bit of a like la la land, you know what I mean? Nobody would ever talk to anybody like this face to face. However, we all have a little bit of a philosophical mind. And so what he's telling me is that enlightenment is not about getting to know something. It's the realization that you know absolutely nothing, completely, and to be okay with that and not finding it troublesome. Then my response was, I feel like we do know a small amount about absolute truth. Like we can know non-duality and that consciousness is not the mind. So I'm disagreeing with him, although I do agree with him in part. I'm disagreeing with him in the sense that I feel like truth does have a purpose on the path. Truth with a capital T, not your... Truth with a capital T also includes your egoic truth once you have a sense of what ego is. See, a lot of people don't even accept that they have an ego. They don't even accept the theory of ego for themselves or for others. So these people basically pretend like they don't have an ego. So you got people like that, right? So the small amount that we do know about absolute truth, that's truth with the capital T. Like we can know non-duality and that consciousness is not the mind. So we can know non-duality. In other words, like the illusion is not separate from the absolute. That would be a duality. Now there's going to be people who are going to tell you, well, it's not a true duality because the illusion isn't real. Well, but that's a thought. See? So the higher non-duality that a lot of people aren't realizing is that the finite and the infinite, there's no duality between the finite and the infinite. I mean, almost nobody gets this. There are like very few people actually get this. And the reason why, in my opinion, is because people are talking about this, they're teaching, they're wrapped up in narratives. They're posting blog entries. And I noticed some of you like stopped posting blog entries. Why did you stop posting blog entries? Because you realize this, right? You realize like when you're in the habit of the mind, that actually conceals consciousness, which is deeper than the mind, because anything that the mind does is seen in awareness, which is constant. And then you miss a deeper non-duality, like you miss the non-duality between the finite and the infinite. Right? That's a thought. And I've seen like really clever ways to try to get around this. Well, the finite doesn't exist, so it's not a true duality. Well, that's a thought too. Do you not understand the difference between a thought and a perception? Well, yeah, your ego wants to say, wants to be a little real clever about how it slices and dices that, but then that's just can be seen through with a little bit of philosophical investigation. So his next comment is, to be at peace with not knowing. You barely know 1% of all there is to know. I'm only saying this to not be extreme. The truth is you literally do not know anything, period. Well, that's a little bit too much of an absolute perspective, in my opinion. I mean, you would have to know something to even say this, right? You barely know 1%. Even that is a knowing. Okay, so, but, I appreciate the dip. This person is actually a very, very astute person, very, very woke person. And I know what they're doing. So, to be at peace with not knowing. Part of this is true. I'm going to explain. So here's my answer before I even elaborate on that. So my answer to him was, from a finite perspective, yes. But from an infinite perspective, we are omniscient, since consciousness with a capital C has no lack. But our avatars are all finite and full of limitation as expressions in space and time. That was my answer. I like that. I mean, it's a pointer. What it's basically saying is that consciousness isn't so focused on your ego. Consciousness is much deeper than any finite perspective. We can see this. Now, Neo-Advaita people are going to argue there is no separate self here to try to avoid this issue. But that's like telling you don't believe your eyes and ears when you see that things are different in the world. Oh, there's no facts. There's no separate self. There is no. Well, yeah, there's no you, right, too, right? So then your voice goes bye-bye, okay? But then, of course, it doesn't apply there. So it's like selective. So you end up with this, kind of, how do I want to describe this? Trying to be diplomatic. You end up with this kind of like ethical situationalism and kind of non-dual cliche, not non-dual even, but Neo-Advaita cliches that shut down discussion. But then the problem with this is that you're kind of allowing yourself to just kind of like do whatever the fuck you want to do, right? I call it the Neo-Advaita warriors. So you allow yourself to do whatever you want to do, and if somebody complains about it, you have this whole like punch list of defenses that you can use to basically kind of project the blame back onto that kind of a person. So it's a little bit like the Zen devil, but it's more like the Neo-Advaita devil. But the thing is that yes, like it's important to like open the doors of your ego so that your shadow can come out and express itself. But at the same time, if you don't even think that you have an ego or you don't think that you have a shadow, then you don't take any kind of ownership over anything. You just project ego onto everybody else. Everybody who talks about themselves as an I or as a person to you seems like a narcissist. But see, really, you're the one, for some reason, that cannot realize that the duality between the finite and the infinite is false. So you're trapped. You're trapped in truth. You can only get along with people that are just like you. You can't accept other people. You become very like stage blue, stage green, like that. A weird cross between stage blue and stage green. So it blocks love. So his suggestion was to be at peace with not knowing. You barely know 1% of all there is to know. I'm only saying this to not be extreme. Well, who is only saying this, right? The truth is you literally do not know anything. I don't know anything, or you don't know anything. And so my response is, from a finite perspective, yes. You do barely know everything there is to know. So, for example, you may know a lot about chicken fried steak and cooking chicken fried steak. You may know a lot about playing trumpet, right? You may know a lot about playing jazz trumpet even. You may know a lot about playing classical trumpet, but you may not know anything about playing jazz trumpet. You may know about playing like ska, like horn parts in ska. But you may not know anything about playing rock, right? So, yes, we do barely know a certain percentage of everything there is to know as a finite perspective, even as an artist. Just because you're great at drawing doesn't mean that you're great at making movies, right? So I agree with that. The truth is you literally do not know anything. Well, okay, the absolute truth is you literally do not know anything. Well, who's the you? So consciousness doesn't know anything, right? I would say yes and no. I mean, truth is a capital T. It knows everything. So the truth is you literally do not know anything, period. That's like both true and false. You have to have a paradoxical mind with this stuff, honestly. If you don't have a paradoxical mind, you're going to miss this. So from a finite perspective, yeah, the truth is, it's not that you don't know anything. It's just that you're a finite perspective. You're a limited perspective. But from a truth with a capital T, some people would even argue that this is not a perspective, but from truth with a capital T, you know everything. You have omniscience. You know everything that consciousness can know as truth with a capital T. So, and that's why I say my response is from a finite perspective, yes. But from an infinite perspective, we're omniscient since consciousness with a capital C has no lack. But our avatars are all finite and full of limitation as expressions in space and time. Okay, friends, so we're halfway through this video. Let me take a break. I'll come back and I'll continue. Just give me 1 second. Okay, friends, welcome back. So let's continue on with this dialogue between me and this person. So his next point is that also enlightenment is the realization that everything is okay. Everything is all right. No matter what happens, it's all going to be good at the end. As the saying goes, everything will be okay at the end. If it's not okay, then it's not the end. And my response here is yes. This is true once you realize things could not have been otherwise. I feel inspired to think that free will exists to a certain extent, even if this is not true. So, what he's talking about is the truth of karma, I think. So in terms of my interpretation. Like everything that is happening is okay to happen the way that it is because that's reality. I consider that to be feminine truth with a capital T. Right? Everything that's here is allowed to be here. That's a respect for reality. And so my response to that is yes, this is true with a capital T from a feminine perspective, just to add that a little bit in. Once you realize things could not have been otherwise. You wouldn't have wanted them to be otherwise either, which is an even deeper thing. Because you wouldn't have explored certain features of reality had things been otherwise. So once you value, like, so for example, I'll give you a good example of this. Oh, I shouldn't have gotten with this person, but we have this beautiful daughter. And as much as I realize I made a mistake of getting with this person, the fact that we have this beautiful daughter, I would not have wished things would have been otherwise. So, because if things were otherwise, you would also have to give up all the consequences, all the growth, all the learning, all the experiences that you had that you wouldn't want to give up. And this points you toward this realization that everything is okay, that everything is all right, no matter what happens, it's all good at the end of the day. As the saying goes, everything will be okay at the end. If it's not okay, then it's not the end. Now, because of the fact that I don't see a duality between the relative and the absolute, I say in response, yes, this is true once you realize things could not have been otherwise. Once you achieve like a feminine integration of truth with a capital T, I feel inspired though to think that, inspired is a key word, to think that free will exists to a certain extent, even if this is not true. In other words, there's no real hard duality between the infinite and the finite. So this is something almost every spiritual person I've come into contact with misses this somehow. So I have a video on the marriage between the human and the divine. Gets into that. So his response is that enlightenment is realizing everything is you. Think of it as solipsism or non-dualism doesn't matter. Thinking of it as solipsism or non-dualism doesn't matter. And my response to this is that I struggle with this one. I no longer think everything is me with the capital M. It's too easy to mistake the ego for consciousness with the capital C here. Everything is me. That way I have my way and everybody else is treated like shit. Yeah, well that me is not, you got to be careful. Because that me is actually a duality. Me versus you. But see, the non-dual me doesn't have a versus. And it's real easy to toggle back and forth between the little me and the big me. So you got to be careful with that kind of insight. And there really is no duality between the two. Unless you're in teacher mode, right? You're trying to teach everybody else what the truth is. What the ruthfulness is. So his response is that enlightenment is realizing everything is inevitable. Everything is perfect just the way it is. And my response here is, yes, I agree. There's maybe a small degree of free will or an ability that one can shape the finite perspective. It's hard not to believe this. So in other words, you're not here just to pretend like you don't have an ego and to pretend like the small self doesn't exist. You're here to create as a small self. That's what the finite allows. The finite allows finite art forms to be created. Whether it's dishes, whether it's comedy routines, whether it's videos, whether it's communities, whether it's music albums, whether it's any other kind of artwork that falls underneath an art form, only the finite perspective can land and create something, whether it's humor, whether it's jest, banter, fucking with somebody, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it could be anything, man. Creation is unlimited. So I don't think everything is inevitable. I think that's a belief. Everything is not perfect just the way it is. If everything was perfect the way that it is, there'd be no artistic creation. So it's kind of like yes and no. What you're missing is yes and no. You're missing stage yellow integration. Because even Shankara made a distinction between the absolute and the practical perspective. So it's just this really like super conservative, almost like ultra conservative Islamic neo-Advaita, like Jim Newman or somebody like that just wants to just take the super extreme perspective and correct everybody's speech. Like there are no facts. You know, it's like you're sitting there telling me that there's no facts. Okay, well anyway, that's just not. I'm not interested in debunking neo-Advaita. I want to get along with these people actually. I want to teach them that, like, you know, love actually goes beyond truth. So his next point is that enlightenment is realizing that you don't need anything. You lack nothing. You are perfect and complete just the way you are. And my response here is that yes, although you still are concerned with survival, you're going to experience the things in time and place and the ups and downs of that. In other words, like, enlightenment, it's being reduced to the absolute only, which is the neo-Advaita kind of. I see neo-Advaita in a way as kind of like half enlightened. Like you got halfway there and then you stopped somehow. You got stuck, right? That's to me what neo-Advaita is. Like you need a religion almost to live by. You don't have freedom. You don't have liberation. You can't move into love, really. You can't move into beauty or aesthetics. You can't really become a creator because you're so beholden to truth and to looping on language that's sort of like religious language. Like you need to worship something, right? Very stage blues, stage green. So, enlightenment is not just realizing that you don't need it, anything. Yeah, on some level that's true. It's called surrender. You lack nothing. That's true from an absolute perspective. Now you could say, well, there is no such thing as an absolute perspective. There is no, right? Like a Catholic teacher, like whacking your knuckles with a ruler. There is no. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that one. So, I would say, yeah, no, we're all still concerned with survival, and we should be. There's no real bright line distinction between self-help and spiritual enlightenment. Because there's no real duality between the finite and the infinite. That's a higher non-duality that 99.9% of people miss for some reason. You are perfect and complete just the way you are. I would say yes and no. There's definitely ways that you can improve in how you want to show up in the world and create in the world within the limitations of all the other considerations. And even the hope and the belief in that, to me, it's satisfying. To other people, they don't like that. And I accept that. I realize, like, not everybody values personal development. Personal development is my number one value. So, the final point, his final point. And finally, enlightenment is realizing you are the creator of reality. You created this universe, nobody else, and there is nothing to do but just to relax and enjoy the ride, knowing that all is well. Who's relaxing, though? The finite perspective? Does consciousness relax? So here's my response. This is a deep one. I love this one. Yes. And what is created is beautiful, even if your ego doesn't resonate with it. This requires acceptance and self-love despite circumstances. However, you are the creator of reality. I like that thesis. That's a deep beauty with the capital B thesis and pointer. You created this universe. I like that too. Like once you get, that's a very high level realization and pointer. And it fits where it fits. Nobody else. That's where I might disagree, because this sounds a little bit too much like solipsism to me. And there is nothing to do but relax and enjoy the ride, knowing that all is well. But who though? Who's doing that? Consciousness surely is not doing that. So it's walking and chewing gum at the same time. It's realizing that, yes, reality is beautiful exactly the way that it is. And in addition, I am a finite creator in reality. So self-help never goes away. Personal growth never goes away, because as a finite perspective, that's the impetus for creation of artworks that gives life so much satisfaction. And once you can have both of those at the same time and not even, that's a very deep level of spiritual enlightenment that goes way beyond truth, goes way beyond love even. Now you're in the realm of beauty or aesthetics or creation. So, okay, friends. Hopefully this was a good video, and I was able to riff off of these and also show the value of dialogue too. And to give him credit for communicating with me and giving me the honor to actually react to what he had to say, both at that time and then supplementing it in this video too. And this is a good example of sometimes like contemplation goes beyond the self. Like contemplation is good to have with another, right? Because people will give you foreign things. See, when you're contemplating with yourself, you're stuck with your own lingo, you're stuck with your own patterns. But when somebody else contemplates, they introduce kind of foreign things that trigger you and goose you, which isn't all bad. I mean, that's how we grow. We don't grow if something isn't triggering or goosing us. Otherwise, we just stay campers instead of climbers. But the climbing isn't required either, although I think the process of development occurs among all people. Some people really grab the bull by the horns with that, and they're like at the peak of the wave, crashing to the surf on that, because that's what they value. They value personal development, personal growth, self-improvement. But not everybody does, and that's okay. We should all be able to get along despite our differing perspectives. Okay, friends, hopefully this was a good video. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.